we're missing one speaker, but yeah, otherwise, yeah.
Don't worry. So what people have done in the past is whatever. You don't need to do anything.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So let's start. Yeah. Yeah. So yes. Yeah, Veronica from Swiss Re, we have to try to get in touch with her. So we can start sitting there, and then we will get you on stage. Yeah. Yeah, that's mine. Yeah. Ah, we'll put it there. Yeah. Can you put it, give it to her? To Louise. They don't want it. So we are getting started. Let's see if the mic is picking up. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much for the support. We are getting started on the next session. So a very warm welcome from our end. My name is Alexander Nick. I'm with WBCSD and I'm heading our climate action work. And together with me,
I'm Caroline de Bruin. I head up our equity work.
So we have today a session on climate adaptation and just transition. And we are going to walk you through a bit of our work, and then we are having a panel, and it should really be also an interactive session, so for all of you to come in. The objective is to unpack what it takes to ensure a just and an equitable climate transition. And we want really to understand what is the understanding of how equity, action and climate justice complements climate adaptation efforts and vice versa. And we are now starting with an overview of the equity work before we go more into the adaptation work, and then we see with the panel together how this will sync.
Thank you, Alex. So as we're thinking about the transition and all the climate crisis and the nature loss that is really on our plate as something to address, it's what's very often forgotten is the equity and the inequality element in that. And so that's why at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, we've been really thinking hard about what the case is really for inequality. So in many ways also how to put the S into ESG also as we're really then thinking about that nexus between climate, nature and equity. And one of the things we found, and that was research done as part of the Business Commission to Tackle Inequality, which we launched a few years ago, is that communicating inequality both as an actual direct systemic and business risk is essential, I think, for all of us to really be kind of nailing this agenda alongside the nature and the climate agenda. It's also an opportunity. It's an area for value creation. And that is, again, something that we're working on closely together with our members. Maybe just to pause with some of the facts that are out there as we're thinking about the just transition and as we're thinking about the people or the human impacts really that we're thinking about with the climate crisis. We're looking at a situation where there's 1.2 billion people that could be displaced because of climate change by 2050. We have 132 million people into extreme poverty by 2030 because of climate change. And at the same time also, as and these are, I believe they're McKinsey estimates, there's also at the same time that $10 trillion annual business opportunity that really could be driving a lot of the work that we're doing. And what you'll be hearing from some of our panel members is really also how they're really putting this human element and kind of the inequality element into their business model and into their DNA. Jobs could result, and at the same time also only 2% of the world's leading businesses are saying anything about a just transition. So that's why in May of this year, we published a 10-point action agenda where we're working with 62 commissioners, so organizations, and 32 partner organizations, and over 150 people from across our member organizations to be leaning into this inequality agenda. There's 10 areas of action under which now, starting in January of next year, so 2024, we're going to be embarking on the next phase of work where it's not just about saying what needs to be done and analyzing what some of the best-in-class solutions are, but really also then to be thinking about what the action are the actions are that we can be taking to be driving our social performance as well as our accountability at an individual company level as well as at a systems level as we're thinking about inequality. As you might have been able to pick up from this agenda, number 10 is our just transition agenda, and that's also then the topic for today. Alex was also asking me, so does that mean that I'm only coming in at, as a climate guy with point number 10? Am I really not that important? But obviously we all know that the highest number is really the number that we should be looking at. So with that, maybe also recognizing that many organizations and people have different definitions and associations with the just transition. What we've been doing in context of the Commission and then within the WBCSD is that we're really seeing 4 different areas of work, or 4 sub-agendas, if you will, as we're thinking about this. One is the path to net zero. So how can we make sure that we're bringing the hundreds of millions of people that need to be part of the transition and to be able to deliver on our 2030 goals to really be part of that solution? That also in a context where, as you're thinking about the energy context, for example, there are about 700 million people today that do not have reliable access to energy. And how can we not just therefore make sure that they do have that access, but also then make sure that it's renewable access? And I think that's really been some of the challenges that members within the Commission also have been trying to nail and that we're now going to be nailing together. Workforce evolution. What does it look like as we're losing jobs, gaining jobs, oftentimes not the same people losing a job as the people who are then trained to be filling some of these green jobs. So we'll be unpacking that a little bit. And some of our panel members have been working on that a lot. Adaptation and community resilience. How do we go place-based, making sure we bring the various communities everywhere along? That's very much also the focus for today. And then finally, climate justice. And again, some of our panel members have been doing a lot of work on that. So with that, handing it over to Alex for some.
So at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, as within many companies, the topic of mitigation, climate action was at the forefront, and obviously rightly so, to keep 1.5 degrees in reach. We have now also started to complement that work this year with our member companies and partners and look at the adaptation side. You can see here that we have been working intensively on a board how-to guide that I will walk you through a bit, because we really feel that this topic needs to get much more on the agenda. And sometimes people are asking me, but what does it mean for the WBCSD? Did you give up on the mitigation side? And definitely not. So we see many more commitments and actions, companies signing up to SBTI, to the Science Based Targets Initiative, to really going all in for mitigation. But at the same time, we hear and we see and we know that adaptation and resilience is so critical. And it is all about the people thriving together with nature and with equity. As we see temperatures continue to rise, physical risks such as floods and heat stress continue to rise. So what have we been seeing? There are 3 key disconnects in the system. The first one is on planning, the second one on finance, and the third one on partnerships. So we look, and this is also what we are putting out in this guide, what are the steps for a good adaptation plan? How does it fit together with other necessary reporting initiatives? How does it relate to transition planning? And how can it really, like adaptation planning, also unlock investments and partnerships? So on the finance side, that is really how to get more public and private funding for adaptation and resilience actions, together with governments, banks, and insurance companies. And then probably also on this panel, we will talk a lot on the need for scaling up partnerships. We all know the nature of adaptation is local, is very local. So we need then local initiatives, including businesses at the table, to discuss resilience at that level, to also ensure business continuity. And this is what we have unveiled here in this guide that we are coming to release in the quarter 1. The business case we will find and make, so around 3 areas. The business continuity. So we look at the security of supplies. We need to work much more on finding what are clear financial incentives that are making adaptation and resilience much more visible. And then the third one is yes, what does business means in societies that have already like huge impacts? How can businesses support resilient communities? We recently spoke to one of our members who owns a large chain of shopping malls, and obviously if the shopping mall is supported with adaptation measures such as flood defenses, however the transport network that is going there that might be flooded, how do staff customers are getting in? So it's all interconnected, and therefore we want to push that agenda, get it next to the mitigation efforts, get it on top of it, to really make a holistic business case, leaving no one behind, looking at an equity, at the nature perspective. The guide that you are seeing, that is displayed, goes into all the different stages. Oh yeah, just go back on the other one, where you will find like a step-by-step guide coming from identifying, assessing physical risks, going over to integrated resilience into core business processes, and then really bringing it to the agenda also besides the risk agenda to the innovation agenda, to bring it to the subject of the CEO. And we are writing this, as you can see, and on the previous slide, that it is really a C-suite driven how-to agenda, so that the C-suite functions and the respective teams get specific how-to support, including many member case studies from WBCSD companies, how they have done their risk assessment, how they integrated data into that, how they then took it forward into adaptation planning, some focus on food and agriculture. They're already much more advanced than other sectors, and then building it out to an opportunity agenda. On the last slide, we are continuing working that in 2024. So we will have 3 core areas that we are going to look at. We want to launch our board activation guide, the C-suite engagement guide, and then engage with the respective business companies on how they can really further strengthen the argument for action within each company. We then have deep dives on adaptation planning, how to make it real, as I mentioned. And then together with partners, because we cannot do this alone, and we do have quite a few round tables coming up over the next days, we look on how can a joint, a shared, a common adaptation framework for businesses support the global goal on adaptation, and how give more support, more structure, the processes that we already know from the corporate performance accountability system for carbon, how can we also create one for adaptation that syncs with the equity and nature agendas? That's on the adaptation front, so that was the first part. And now we would like to welcome our panel. So with us on our panel, we have, and please all come up, Alexis Haas, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Arcadis. We have, has Veronica arrived? Ah, yes, Veronica, lovely to have you with us, the Chairperson, Public Sector Solutions for Swiss Re. Samir Selim from the Center for Sustainable Development from the University of Liberal Arts in Bangladesh. And last but not least, Sally, the Chief Executive Officer from the Forum for the Future. So welcome.
Wonderful. So what we wanted to do now is translate some of the concepts and the ambitions and the framing that we just played out to the day-to-day management and strategies of each of the organizations here on stage. So would love to start with you, actually, Veronica, and sorry just to be putting you on the spot like 2 minutes after you were rushing in. And I'll say a little bit more as you're kind of getting ready, kind of why we were so keen to frame up the session really with you. You and I had a conversation earlier in the week, which was one of the highlights of my week, where you talked about the wealth also of information and insight that you have with Swiss Re, so as a B2B insurance company, essentially on the real elements of resilience and with that subsequently also that requirement of adaptation, and in that also then thinking about what are some of the long-term costs of not being resilient and some of the things we should already be thinking about today as we're managing our supply chain. So would love for you to say a little bit more about how you see this topic and what you bring to the table there.
And I commit to be brief because my iPad doesn't work, so I'm not going to indulge you with a lot of comments. But no, thank you, Caroline, for having me. And it was a mutually interesting conversation. We had dinner together at the World Business Council Summit dinner, so it was an amazing chat. So I work in insurance, and in fact, I work for one of the largest reinsurance companies in the world, Swiss Re. And you know what we do is take long-tail risks, the type of risks that others, really struggle to manage and to make terms with. And so we have to think in a very holistic and very long-term view, as Caroline noted, because that's our business. So we're dependent of making, as well as we can, risk-informed decisions. Resilience for us is at the essence, as part of the ethos of the company. In fact, our motto is making the world more resilient. And it's through everything that we do that we try to bring that motto to life. And in that sense, we have to kind of go to Alexander's graphics. We have to think about our strategies. So are we strategically aligned with this making the world more resilient vision? And so things, there are things that simply will not do because we don't believe that are actually adding resilience we think will be damaging. But there is a lot that we can do. And sometimes it takes a tremendous amount of effort and investment, not just strategically, but actually to be able to operationalize a vision like that, you have to invest over the years in getting the data, the evidence, the capabilities within the firm to be able to bear to fruit some of those, ambitions and statements. And so there is a lot of investment in R&D that we do. But for us, it's part and parcel of who we are. That's why I go back to the ethos of the firm. And we do it for a number of reasons. Well, first, because living in a world of increasing uncertainty, and our in particular tend to get a little bit of a skewed sense because we pick all the most extreme risks that are out there. We can only be successful when we can start reduce that uncertainty and start to bring assessment and risk management to it. Secondly, we know that by making that investment ourselves, we can help the entire insurance industry. We're global. We have been around for 160 years. The 13th of this month. And so those technologies, those insights can be spread to a very broad community. And more recently, we're starting to do it also with our corporate partners, our partners in the real economy. Thirdly, we feel that, and this is where my team actually comes to the fore, we can do that as a supportive partner for policies at governmental level. So I lead the public sector solutions for the firm, which is a clear mandate to develop business opportunities with governments. And it's a very unique way because we're not just there to influence or lobby, but we're there actually to find together solutions. And we have to work around a whole host of gaps. Maybe I'll wrap it up with one or two ideas of what this concretely means. In the context of climate analytics, for instance, and in general resilience, we have developed platforms, digital platforms that allow us to use all the information that we have on our own book, so through our own business, as well as everything that we can find that is readily available, publicly available. It's integrated, and we have digital twinning of the world, of any of your footprints and operations as they stand today. You can get insights of what your risks are today, as well as IPCC compliant projections all the way down to the end of the century. And that gives us a very rich picture as to what the future could look like. Then and this is linking to your physical risk pillar, Alexander. But on the top of that, we actually believe that the biggest threat to economic stability and progress is the non-physical damage. What does it mean to have a shock that prevents, for instance, companies from having delivery of goods, or ports from operating, or people going to work in the case of extreme heat? And we started to develop this more economic dimension, non-physical damage analytics. On top of that, we've integrated biodiversity dimensions because we believe this is essential to inform business strategy. And the work is nascent at this point. I mean, we're very proud we got awarded, but we know that we can only answer a set of questions. And for us to be real business partners to all of you in the room, we have to work more in collaborations with one another. The last thought I would say, part of our ethos, part of our risk management practices, part of what we seek to do ever more is to add equity, which I know is one of the topics that is very close to your heart, and to start develop metrics that allow us to say, through the work that we do, how are we impacting the life of communities, populations, and vulnerable categories around the world? And it's whilst it is not simple, I can tell you wholeheartedly is hugely rewarding to be able to have this conversation and to see through our interventions that we can make a real difference also there. So it becomes truly a whole of society approach in the end.
Thank you so much, Veronica. And this is really exciting to hear that you're using all your data and your insights that you have, not just for initially physical risk and the implications and how the future could look like, but also like, as you shared now, on disruptions, on economics, people, companies, and trying to measure equity is something I wholeheartedly agree. Taking it,
Alex, one of the things also that we were talking about a lot is this notion of the questions that we're getting a lot is, should we do it now, or could we just first do climate, then do nature, then do equity? And I think the conversation that we were having is really kind of, at the end of the day, we need to be doing everything everywhere all at once in a way. And I think that's kind of been where just being able to add data to that and insight and evidence really helped my case. So
because that's what the C-suite wants. Show me the facts. Show me the figures. Make a business-like case.
Yeah, indeed. Taking it from the insurance, reinsurance perspective to a country perspective, Samir, if you may come to you and to the work that you are doing in Bangladesh. And you recently published a report on just transitions focusing on energy, food, and ready-made garments sector, as well as some exciting insight on green skills. So we would love to get your country, Bangladesh, but probably also beyond Bangladesh perspective on the topic.
Thank you. Just picking up from that, so we just last year published this work, and we looked at all the sectors relevant in Bangladesh. And the reason these three key ones, agriculture, energy, and RMG sector came as the top priorities was, 70% of people in Bangladesh are still involved in agriculture. RMG is the largest, contributor to the GDP in Bangladesh. And energy, Bangladesh is again one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. So the demand and need for energy is only going to rise. Plus, we have the mandate to move to 10% renewable. We're only 3% right now. So, how do we start this transition? And some key findings came out from this report. So I'll just share the first one, is the fact that these sectors and others are still working in silos, right? So, as we're trying to link up this just transition to the work in Bangladesh, obviously a lot of work going on adaptation and resilience at the same time. It's one of the, most vulnerable countries to climate change. There needs to be more partnerships and conversations between labor rights, so labor organizations, private sector, insurance companies is a big one. Again, we're looking, within the agri sector, and energy. And so there's the gap there on really, what are those areas that as we move towards this transition to a low carbon. So the skills is the first thing that came up. There's a massive need for upskilling in these sectors. But linking that back to the just part and the adaptation. So parallelly, there's work happening in the adaptation resilience space where, you're looking at alternate livelihoods or more climate smart agriculture, climate resilient agriculture. Then, you're looking into other areas for adaptation. But then you're having the skills training very much particular to industry, which is not really linking up to what's happening on the ground. And I'll give one example of that. Within the RMG sector, It's mostly the women workforce there. It's mostly women that are employed there. And there's also a lot of climate migration happening and people moving to these urban spaces where these factories are. But heat and flooding is two of the biggest things they're having to adapt to. So within the factories, inside the factories, there's a lot of work on, on more efficient machineries, on upscaling, but then the places where they're living, the transport, you mentioned that, how are we bringing the adaptation in that? How are we dealing with, outside? So that's, again, where labor laws are coming in, because you might provide a workspace, that's more, dealing with the heat impacts, but more sick days due to heat-related, children being sick, elderly. So, those just bringing in these elements, you see there's a need to intersect there, right? So there's that aspect. The second one is the fact that equity, right? As there is the leaving no one behind agenda comes into so much into the forefront here, because this workforce, we're talking about the greening, they are a particular sector of the population working, but then, how are we bringing children, elderly, vulnerable, those communities into this, adaptation resilience space as well, to make sure, they're also part of this transition that we're trying to move towards. So these are, two insights.
Thank you, Samia. And one of the things also that we're hearing from many of our 230 plus members within the council, but also then on the flip side from all of the NGOs and INGOs and public sector organizations that we're working with, is that how do you then make that connection? Because it's like, how as an individual company would you then be dealing with all these stakeholders and engage in the right way, and especially then as we're thinking about it, from the perspective of Arcadis as a global player, that the reality of needing to go local and place-based, but also be global and be connecting the dots is such a challenge. So maybe Alexis, if you can speak a little bit about what you've done at Arcadis to be integrating this challenge and opportunity into your work.
Sure. Is this on? Yep, great. So to let those in the room know who don't know Arcadis, it is a global design and engineering company. It's Dutch. And we work in areas across global business areas like resilience, meaning energy transition and water, environment, as well as places, so commercial and industrial places, net zero facilities, et cetera. And mobility, including things like new mobility or redesign of intelligent rail or connected highways, these sort of things. So we really see infrastructure across the world in all the different areas that are currently need to be built in a way that are both mitigating climate change and at the same time adaptive and ready for exactly the kind of challenges that we just spoke about. And actually some of those are relying on tools that enable us to look at those assets and model scenarios on what would happen. And we did this with in York with the Port Authority on looking for their assets and using some of the software tools that we have to be able to say, okay, let's model this in case of sea rise and flooding. Let's model this in case of extreme heat. And you can actually look at what differences you need to make to that infrastructure. But that's only on the one side where you're actually looking at the facility itself. And it doesn't, in most of our work, you actually have to look at how the community is being affected by that asset. And it's very present when it comes to our work with transit authorities in terms of making sure that you're actually designing transit in a way that it is bringing more people in connection and towards more opportunities, but yet in a way that is actually reducing emissions overall. And that's why usually when we do any of this work, it's actually a community study that is simultaneously in line with the technical studies that we're looking at to build out these assets. But I could give maybe two specific examples. One, which is looking at the Buffalo Sewer Authority. One example we had to do was to look at their long-term resilience plan. But what the client asks for, often they don't know what they don't know. So they're asking us to take looks for them and bring them multiple options proactively that would say, okay, well, how do we do this in a way that addresses perhaps some historical inequities? How could we rebuild this infrastructure in a way that it actually prioritizes delivery to those groups and minimizes disruption while we're going through this build out of these infrastructure projects? And that one, actually, the Buffalo Sewer Authority is an example that now we're starting to use and share around in conferences in 2024 about how you can model doing that kind of design and work with communities. I do want to say one thing, because I could talk about some of the positive examples of what we have for doing these projects well, but I also want to be realistic about what the constraints are. We're a global firm. Some of the work that we're doing now is in this sort of community engagement is incredibly well supported by some of the frameworks coming into being, like the Justice 40 framework in the US, like the social value initiatives in the UK. Similarly, the Prostrati ladder, the similar one in the Netherlands. That being said, there's not an aligned framework yet out there that can actually help you measure and sort of say universally, if you want to set targets against how many of your projects will create what level of difference in terms of social justice, in terms of just transition. And this is one of the things that we're working on internally in the company, to try and work across different regional areas and try and develop out some of these frameworks, because what you have a lot now is you have a lot of sort of guidelines of what best practice would be, but obviously people like to measure what gets measured, what gets done, but it is very hard to sort of excerpt out yet good metrics in the way that people have gotten to with, like, carbon, for example. This is something that we can do more in infrastructure, and I think this is something that we definitely need to do in this space in order to create a consistent way of bringing that social value and that social justice to all our projects.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for sharing the insights of the work of Arcadis. And yeah, it resonates when you said, yeah, some companies, clients do not know what they don't know, and how to support them and help them to bring them along, as well as the pieces on the adaptation framework, and to translate this from a global goal to a corporate level, and then to the project and local level. So if we talk about what that people do not know, what they should know, I remember, Sally, if I may come over to you, we had a dinner discussion a year ago on systems perspective and on thinking beyond just climate, and take it as well as Victoria, as you said, in an integrated perspective, activating, yes, both the hearts and the minds to really make it, let's go all in. So Sally, as you're a think tank and really forward-looking and driven, it would be great if you could share some of your most recent climate justice work, your responsible energy work, and perhaps also on the Climate and Health Coalition. So over to you, Sally.
Thank you. Great to be here. So yes, for those of you that don't know Forum for the Future, we're a sustainable development non-profit. We operate in Europe, US, India, and in Singapore. We are quite small, but we have a very big ambition, which is to accelerate transformation. We used to say towards a sustainable future. We now talk about a just and regenerative future. So we've really worked hard at pushing that social dimension of sustainability into the North Star of the work that we do. And running through all of our work, like a little stick of rock, is equity and justice and the desire for regeneration. And maybe I'll just try and bring that to life through our 3 transition spaces. So as an organization, we're focusing on 3 transitions that we think could help deliver this systems repatterning, this just and regenerative future. The first is energy, and that's where the Responsible Energy Initiative sits. So thank you for mentioning that. This is it actually is our biggest project, which we're running out of India. And we're trying to play a role to ensure that the transition to renewable energy is ecologically safe and socially just. What we find in Asia is the words regenerative and just don't quite translate. So ecologically safe, socially just does it better. And within the Responsible Energy Initiative, true of all of our work, we've tried to bring the system together, so the community activists with the investors, with the brands, with government, to try and take that whole systems approach to say, how might we ensure that that movement to renewable energy is ecologically safe and socially just? There are 6 pilot projects up and running right now, supported by the MacArthur Foundation and some others. But just to call out 4 of those where we're really trying to hold equity and adaptation as we make this transition. The first is looking at how do we think about land use in a systemic way. Renewable energy requires an awful lot of land. And there's one approach of delivering land for that renewable energy that is single issue. Or what we're trying to do through the Responsible Energy Initiative is think about integrated land use models that actually allow provision of land for renewable energy, but also allow scaling of regenerative agriculture in a way that then can build adaptation and resilience. The second pilot work stream is absolutely about investment. So how can we build awareness amongst the investors that are pouring money into renewable energy to specify equitable outcomes, to center human rights in how they're centering that investment? The third I wanted to talk about is actually the procurement process itself. So we're really happy to partner with the Climate Group through their RE100 initiative and actually build guidance for those that are procuring renewable energy to, again, specify these ecologically safe and socially just outcomes. And then you've all mentioned communities, and the fourth pilot work stream I wanted to focus on is where, and this is hard in India, where we're trying to look at participatory approaches to scaling to renewable energy, centering the community voice in determining how and where and how best to scale. So that's REI. It's not easy, but we are committed to trying to play our role in that energy transition. Our second transition space, and I'm going to mention this really briefly, only because it picks up on, Alexis, a point that you made. We're doing an awful lot of work in regenerative agriculture. I love regenerative agriculture because from a systems perspective, it's just got such high impact. We restore soil health, tick for climate, tick for nutrition, tick for farmer livelihood. There's nothing not to like about regenerative agriculture as far as I'm concerned. But why I mention it is because we have a work stream within our US project, Growing Our Future, focused on social outcomes. How do we measure the social outcomes? In this case of regenerative agriculture, we've created a framework that moves from farmer livelihood to communities to broader ecosystem benefits. And I think it could have application across other sectors. So that's food. And then our third transition space is we have kind of mixed our apples and oranges here. It's not a socioeconomic system, it's business. So nothing small there. We're trying to play a role in transitioning the role of business so that business sees a much broader role for itself in driving positive impact for our economy, our society, and for our environment. And the 2 projects I just wanted to feature there, American Climate Futures, we're working with the B Lab to create a playbook for the private sector to enable them to meaningfully and authentically engage with communities around climate justice. Many organizations in the private sector now recognize their role in climate justice, but for good reason in many cases, are not that well trusted by communities. And so we've been working with community groups, with community partners to center their voice to create a playbook that will be published next year. And then I guess the project that touches everything we've been talking about today in that business transition space, and it's why I'm here at COP, is our Climate and Health Coalition. We're working with a number of private sector actors to unlock the role of the private sector to drive co-benefits for climate, for health. So absolutely everything, everywhere, all at once. And we launched the digital version of our guidance on Sunday, on Health Day. And we're looking in that guidance, and there is guidance now for private sector actors to look at how do you build community resilience, center equity. Let's remember, climate justice is health equity. They're one and the same thing. And how do you do that in ways also that build adaptation? And one of the examples we talk about is from one of our partners, Walgreens. They have this wonderful project in US healthcare where they're disproportionately investing in underserved communities that currently have access to health to not only build health resilience, increase equity, but also build climate adaptation as well. And so I hope that just gives you a flavor of our approach. It's much more complicated. It would be much easier to pick off single issues, but actually we do need to hold the systems view here. My final thing to say, because Caroline has asked me to, is this is all why I'm really delighted to be one of the Business Commission for Tackling Inequality. Am I ambassador or a champion? Or anyway, I'm really interested. I have an official title, but it's why the BCTI work that WBCSD is really focused on, that Caroline leads, is so important. Because unless we centre equity, which in turn will strengthen democracy, then the global agreements we need to deal with climate biodiversity just won't work. So inequality could detract from our ability to do everything that we're talking about here at COP. So centering equity, I think, has never been more important.
Thank you so much, Sally. And as I've been reflecting, so I joined, in full transparency, I joined this role 3 months ago. And so as I'm thinking about what drove me to this agenda, I think on the one hand is obviously, and I think we've extensively discussed that at this point, is the burning platform that is here and the necessity for all kinds of reasons to be leaning into this agenda now. What we've seen in that also in many of the emerging and developing markets, the crisis and the people crisis is actually on organizations' doorsteps today. It's not something of the future, it's here now. And I think there's so much also within that then that we can learn, that I can learn being in the Netherlands from these other markets and countries where this is already happening, and from some of the commissioner members that we have in these regions. The thing that gives me hope, and our CEO Peter Bakker reminded us earlier in the week, is we cannot give up, right? This is a story of hope, and that is going to have to be the theme for COP28, is that the future is also already here. As I'm looking around the room and all of the solutions that are here, all of the frameworks that are here, all of the trusted partners that really, at the end of the day, have been working together in different shapes and forms already. And I think that's really now what we're trying to do through our work together, as we're trying to figure out within the council how climate and nature and equity all connects, but really to be thinking about this as a connected action agenda. We don't need to all be working together at the same time. What would be great, and that's now what we're trying to do, and also going back, Alexis, to your point on integration, is to kind of see what are some of the metrics that that Veronica is already using in her line of business that we can then apply to that framework that you were talking about, as we're trying to then integrate the dots and turn it into ultimately a shared social performance, adaptation performance, and accountability system. So over to you, Alex, maybe for some.
We have a couple of minutes left, and we know this is a short session, somehow in lunch, and we are all rushing. But I would definitely like to check if it resonated. First, a couple of comments, either from you or also, if you're up for it, also from our audience.
I have a comment, but I want to make sure that if somebody has a question, they get to ask it first. So.
Yeah, there's one, and then we have and then come in afterwards.
Thank you all so much. My name is Ian Hitchcock, and I'm a public policy master's student at Duke University. One of the questions I've always had around corporate efforts in particular to address sustainability is that... I'm sorry, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Is that there seems to sometimes be a disconnect between the kind of underlying impulses of corporations as a whole to make more money, produce more things, sell more things, and our sustainability imperatives. And so I'm wondering, in the spaces that you all navigate, how do you reckon with those tensions sometimes between the forces that underline our economic development and economic growth at all costs, and the fact that we need to change and shift some of the ways in which we operate? Thank you.
I think as Swiss Re specifically, we are maybe in a privileged position because we are a listed company, but we're listed in Switzerland. So our bylaw is in Switzerland, and shareholder matters, but actually our bylaws refer to our stakeholders, including employees and society at large. So as a firm, we have a very clear mandate to create value for all involved. And I think that really keeps us alerted to the possibility of just becoming loop-sided. And of course, as I said, people may think that insurance or reinsurance thrives in chaos, but it's actually quite the opposite. We do really, really well when we can have a stable environment, that's where we make most money. So there is an alignment between having orderly transitions. I believe that the world will continue to evolve, will continue to face uncertainties of different natures. We learn ever more factors that may be out of just lack of practice we haven't factored in concretely and correctly. And so it is possible that in 3 years from now, I stand in front of you and I come up with a fourth dimensions that I haven't mentioned today. And it's not because I'm being malicious, but it's because I'm just ignorant. And I'm trying to learn every day through the work I do. What is it that I'm missing? What else do I need to incorporate in my decision making and in the way I steer the firm? But I think that perspective of having hope and to work together to make sure that we're being inclusive in our thinking and our strategies is fundamental. So I don't feel the pressure of my organization vis-a-vis the work I do. I get a lot of support and thumbs up from my colleagues. And I think by demonstrating through the specific area that I cover, which is where market don't exist or market don't function well, so I'm kind of at the bleeding edge of things that don't work. I can prove to them that if we can succeed in this area to integrate equity, equality, nature consideration, climate, then they can also do so. And that's exactly what is happening.
Alexis and then Sally. Yeah.
Your question, I think, is a very valid one, which is that it is sometimes the incentives may not be always aligned. So in some senses, we do need the support of governments to help us align those incentives. And actually, businesses thrive really well when they understand what the rules of the game are, and then they can make a lot of money off of the back of those. So one of the things that is horrible for many of our clients, because we have 50% public, 50% private clients around the world, is when that stability, like you were talking about, is not there. And we don't know, we know directionally now where we're going, and it would be really great to also get some of that indication in a unified way across policy. One important thing, though, is if you're in an infrastructure company right now, in the built environment, this is actually a great time to be in that business because we need to rebuild everything. Infrastructure has 30 to 50-year lifespans and above. And so every single project I'm building now needs to operate in 2050 under standards that we would need in 2050. And so where our real tensions are right now is not on the lack of opportunity side, because our energy transition solutions, our net zero facilities solutions, they're in high demand. Where actually the difficulty is, and it goes back to the metrics, is to not have either aligned metrics across the world, they're different metrics, or ones that are not fit for purpose, that don't show you where you can apply the innovations to, it doesn't show you exactly where you need to change. And then I think what we have to recognize is that we have these 5 different dimensions that we measure at Arcadis. It is from carbon, circularity, nature, biodiversity, water, and social impact. And in infrastructure, you can often get win-wins across many, but you can't necessarily always get win-wins across all. And we have to understand when and where we want to do trade-offs against one so that you get the optimum outcome. And since you can't just average a number on these. And this is a real thing that we usually have that conversation with the communities to try and figure out.
So we have Sally and then Samia, and then we
we're
come
at
to
time.
a close, but let's please speak. Yeah?
Brilliant question. My answer is we need to get better at holding multiple time frames because the economy is transitioning. Pathways to value creation are shifting. How we make money today won't be how we make money even maybe 3 to 4 years time from now, because there'll probably be a price on carbon. And so what I advise any C-suite board members to do is, yes, understand how you drive profitability today, but put yourself into the future, ask you how you drive profitability tomorrow, and hold both of those timeframes, because then as the economy transitions, you can transition with it.
I didn't really have anything else to add to the discussions other than we need to be doing this. There is no, to me, there is no conflict this or that. We have to move towards a more just, equitable, carbon negative, nature positive economy, and that's, we just have to pave our ways to get there.
Well, in a way, those are the closing words, right? A just and regenerate a future, as you coined it. So thank you very much for all on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all in the audience and also the support team. I think this is a great location. And yes, enjoy the rest of your COP experience.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you next year at COP, hopefully with some tangible results also from the work that we're all doing. Thank you.